I've been using the Sony full-frame camera system for wedding photography for about 4 years now, and I started with the A7 III, upgraded to the A7 IV when that came out, and I have found the settings I'm going to share with you in this video to be the ideal settings for fast, reliable, and ergonomic autofocus. So without any delay, let's just hop right into the menu system and get started. So first thing we want to do here is hop into the menu, autofocus menu, and we want to go to this first menu here and make sure that our focus mode is in continuous autofocus. Priority set in autofocus continuous. I like to leave on balanced emphasis. Now there are 3 options in here. I wouldn't leave it on release. The second option you might want to play around with is AF, which is going to increase the likelihood of getting a shot in focus, but it may make things go a little bit slower. I've done a bit of testing with AF as priority and I haven't found there to be too much of any difference. I think these modern day Sony cameras are so good at autofocus that I think anyone is going to be hard pressed to find a speed difference between these 2 settings. That said, on paper, balanced emphasis is going to be maybe slightly faster than if you were to have it set in the AF priority. I would rather get the shot when I hit the shutter and maybe not have absolutely perfect focus rather than totally miss the frame I am attempting to take. Again, I've never had an issue with getting any shot I wanted in any lighting situation, so AF priority is something I just don't think is necessary. AF tracking sensitivity, I leave on standard. Doesn't really matter to me because I don't use the tracking function for photos. AF illuminator, I leave this to off. This is one of those settings that older cameras have that have crossed over to mirrorless. If you leave it to auto, it will supply a red fill light that will automatically turn on if the camera is having trouble focusing in low light. Again, I just think that this autofocus is so good, even in low light, that I've never needed it, and I'd rather be less intrusive, and I think the videographer at the wedding will probably appreciate not having me light them up with a red light during their first dance. If you find you have trouble focusing in low light, feel free to turn it on, but I personally leave it off. Aperture drive in AF, again, we have 3 options here. I leave mine on focus priority. Previously, we left priority set in AFC to balanced emphasis. Now, if we leave aperture drive in AF to focus priority, we're kind of balancing, we're meeting kind of in the middle between these 2 settings. This is basically controlling the audio level of the aperture drive, which even when set to focus priority isn't that loud at all. It does say in the menu that this might slow down the continuous shooting speed, but is going to improve the precision and speed of autofocus. Sort of confusing, but in my experience, I've had no issues with the continuous shooting speed. AF with shutter, I leave on. I do not back button focus. I use the shutter button. Pre-AF, I leave off. If you leave this on, the camera will constantly hunt for focus, which I find is just unnecessary and will also drain the battery a lot faster. So mainly we are focused on 2 buttons here, the AF on button and the joystick, or the multi-select center button as Sony calls it. And because our thumb is going to be right there, pretty much ready to go, ready to find these buttons very easily, that is going to make everything super easy when we're shooting to change autofocus modes into the most optimal one that we are going to need in that particular situation. So first thing we are going to do is we're going to go to the bottom yellow briefcase icon here, and we're going to go to dial customize and make sure that we are in the photo custom key / dial set, not this one. This one is for video settings. So we're going to hop in here. We are going to come down to the second icon, or rear 2, button number 1. And you can find the switch focus area in page 20 of 32. Go ahead and set that. There is one more important setting that we need to set in the menu to maximize speed of this custom button, but first let's set the AF on button. You can find the AF on button in the first icon here / rear 1, and we're going to go to number 2, and you can find the IAF option in page 22 of 33. Go ahead and set it. Now when you have this button depressed, it's going to override the focus area you're using if you're using any mode other than wide, and search for an eye instead of the specific focus spot. It's super easy to find and use quickly because it's the largest custom button on the back of the camera that doesn't have the texture of the joystick, so we can easily differentiate between the 2. This can be really useful for me during portraits if I want to go from using a smaller focus point to telling the camera to search for an eye manually without having to change anything else. Okay, now back to the switch focus area setting that we set earlier for the joystick. If we go into the AF/MF settings again in the menu here, and then go to focus area, we're going to go to focus area limit, and you can see here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options, 14 if you count their respective tracking counterparts. I mentioned briefly earlier that I don't use any of these tracking modes. These tracking settings can be useful for video work, but for photo, I just find it pretty much unnecessary. So I stick to the standard focus modes. So back to the top row here, we have 7 options, which is great. But over the years, I found that the only ones that I need are wide and expand spot. So we're going to go ahead and turn all of these off. And don't just hit the menu button to go back. We want to make sure that we hit OK here before we exit, so it saves these settings. The wide setting is great for when I'm taking solo, couples, or even group portraits. And if the wide mode isn't grabbing the person or spot that I want, I can easily switch to expand spot to grab the exact spot that I want. Expand is basically the small spot, which is great, but I've found that the solo small spot was sometimes too small. So with expand, if focusing isn't possible on the small center spot, the camera will start to look for pixels to focus on outside of that small spot in a wider but still small area, hence the expand spot. Expanded spot is a larger than medium but smaller than large spot, so it's a perfect middle ground if the small spot is too small. I found that all those other modes were either redundant or not useful, and Sony has given us the option to limit the modes that we want to toggle through, which simplifies my whole entire process of finding and using an autofocus mode. I don't have all these modes to cycle through. I'm either in one mode or the other, and anything that's going to free me up to be speedy and think less technical is a huge plus on a wedding day. You might not have these exact settings on some other Sony Alpha cameras, but hopefully you can find something in the menu system that's fairly similar. These are the settings that I have personally found worked best for me, but feel free to play around with your own settings and buttons and other focus modes. I hope you guys found that helpful. That is going to do it for this video, and I'll catch you guys at the next one.